On today's episode of the Black Studies Podcast, we have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Tamara T. Butler, community cultivator and thought leader who draws upon lessons learned growing up on Johns Island, South Carolina. Currently, she serves as the executive director of the Avery Research Center for African American History and Culture and associate dean of strategic planning and community engagement for the College of Charleston Libraries. At the College of Charleston, she is a member of the Executive Committee for African American Studies. Beyond campus, Dr. Butler serves as commissioner for the Gullah Geechee Cultural Heritage Corridor, a board member for the Coastal Conservation League, and an International African American Museum and a trustee for the National Council of Teachers of English Research Foundation. The Charleston County School of the Arts alum went on to earn degrees from Xavier University of Louisiana and The Ohio State University. Prior to joining the team at the Avery Research Center, Dr. Butler was an associate professor of critical literacies at Michigan State University. As a scholar teaching and working at the intersections of English education, African American studies, and ecology, she has authored over 10 journal articles and book chapters that explore youth activism, civic engagement, Black girlhood, and placemaking. In her co-authored book, Where is the Justice? Engaged Pedagogies in Schools and Communities, Dr. Butler highlights transformative education that centers community partnerships, student voices, and creative educators. When she is not teaching bar or repotting plants, she can be found curled up with a good book and snacks. On today's episode of the Black Studies Podcast, we have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Tamara Butler, who is the executive director of the Avery Research Center for African American History and Culture at the College of Charleston. How are you doing today, Dr. Butler?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited to talk to you. So, I know it is early in the semester and it's a lot going on. I don't want to take too much of your time. So, how did you get into Black Studies and what keeps you committed to doing work in Black Studies?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me. The semester is off to a fun start. But, for me, I got into Black Studies really through a couple of pathways. So one was the advice of the late Dr. Geneva Cannon, Katie Geneva Cannon. And so one day we had lunch and I said, I think I want to do work around Black studies. So she's a womanist theologian. She did a lot around leadership. And so at the time she had written a book, Katie's Canon. Right. And so I was like, okay, well, let's talk. And let's see. And I mostly knew her as a family friend. I didn't realize that, she was so influential in the field. And she said, you should apply if you want to do Black studies work and study Black studies. You look at the Midwest and the West Coast. And so I was like, okay. Before that, I had a professor at Xavier University of Louisiana, Dr. Darif Jamerson, and he was probably my first Black Studies professor. And so it'd be at this HBCU with a Black Studies professor. And, talking to him when I graduated and a little bit after that, he also gave kind of similar advice about, where do you want to go? What do you want to do? But I also was like, I didn't realize people could get degrees in Black Studies. So between the two of them, I ended up at Ohio State. And so at The Ohio State is where I got a chance to meet more scholars and study Black studies and really center my community. So being a Gullah Geechee descendant, my family still lives in the Gullah Geechee corridor in South Carolina. I've had the pleasure of returning back and speaking from those lands. And so I stay committed to Black studies because I was interested in trying to figure out how to talk about my family and my community's history. And so my commitment continues as we're gaining more ancestors and losing more elders in our community. It's how do we capture those stories? How do we think about the field and how it helps us center the lives of everyone in the community, not just the scholars, but also the everyday community members. And so for me, that's what keeps me committed, is being able to amplify those stories and also being able to share with students and folks alike. Like Black studies is a field. There's so many doors that can open by studying Black studies. And so I do that constantly through my kind of everyday practices and also through my practices of teaching and working at Avery.
Thank you. So I want to expand on that just a little bit, because I think what you said about like Black studies beyond just the academy and like making sure these voices are captured of elders. Um, how do you see, or in what ways, right, does Black studies in the academy help to maybe support or facilitate that capturing of the voices of Black studies outside of the academy?
Yeah. So I think the academy provides us with a lot of tools. And so in some, in different climates, because this political one is different. But in different political climates, there was a variety of resources, whether it be scholarship, whether it be the actual tools. So, um, best example is I work for the College of Charleston libraries. The Avery Research Center is situated within that. So I have a colleague who was hired and runs the Low Country Oral History Initiative. And so that is open to a variety of community members. So what I made sure to do was promote it to my own community and people who I know just love history. And what I found is people like my mother signed up. She applied, the pastor of our church applied, and other community members came along to just learn like how do you do oral history work so that it's not just about, me putting a video camera in front of my, great grandmother, but that there are strategies to do that. And so when I say that, I think Black Studies and the Academy in particular has resources available that can they can equip community members to capture their own stories,
Mhm.
that they would like to, and then be involved in the process of archiving and cataloging those stories. And so for Black Studies, I think one of our biggest things is that we wanted to be able to look at our own histories and how they intersect with a variety of policies, a variety of social movements and issues around justice. And so we have people having the ability to capture that in real time. And it's not just a cluster of academicians. I
Mhm.
think we know what our communities, we have an idea of what our communities need and want. And so, so for me, I would say that as the academy, it's being able to ensure that community members can tell those stories and then secure them, archive them in the way that they like so that we're not waiting until people pass and then we have to piecemeal a story together. And so that goes along with like troubling the archives and all the work that I think not just historians use, but a variety of scholars use to understand who are we as a
Mhm.
people. So that's my big thing is I think we have a lot of tools and theories and physical tools that we can share with community members that they can then take on whatever project they want, and we're just here to help, back them up along the way.
Thank you.
Welcome.
That's very important to expand on. Um, so building on that, um, so you do have a master's in African American and African Studies from The Ohio State University. Um, but you also have master's and a PhD in education. So how do you see how do you situate yourself disciplinarily, not just in terms of education and Black studies, but also like the community component, which is so integral to the work that you do?
Yeah. So I mean, so yes. So I have a PhD and a master's in education, and I think I use those tools in my teaching. So I would probably say borrowing from Lee Patel, who is also in the field of education, the concept of being disciplinarily disobedient. And I think I'm that because I took all of that background into an English department at Michigan State for 6 years. And there I got a chance to infuse African American studies into an English education classroom. So getting students to think about what does it mean to not just teach Black writers, but to understand where they're situated politically, where they're situated, chronologically, and really how they bend the genre to open us up to think about social commentary. So I was like, great. Now my educators, aren't just putting Black text in classrooms for the sake of putting Black text in classrooms, but understanding that these folks are having global conversations through their writings. So then when I get to College of Charleston, I am not in the School of Education. I haven't taught any courses there, but instead, I somehow got sneaked into where I'm now teaching environmental studies courses. So I'm teaching a race, gender, and the environment course. My first course when I came to College of Charleston was Rooted and Sovereign, and it was interested in Black and Indigenous relations to land, but it was a women and gender studies course. And it was cross-listed with African American studies. So I think somewhere along the lines, these three disciplines had a conversation and they were like, hey, we think you'd be a good fit for teaching this course. And so in that class, I really get to do the same thing again, right? Where I'm like, let's talk about Black relations to land in a place like Charleston. And then let's talk about Black, Indigenous, Brown, let's talk about all the relationships to land and one another. And so in that regard, I still keep my educator hat on because these topics can be very heavy. And, in this political climate, people can feel like it's very accusatory that, well, I'm a white person and you're saying that I polluted everything. And I'm like, no, that's not what I'm saying. I was saying, let's talk about whiteness. Let's talk about anti-Blackness. And let's talk about how and anti-indigeneity and how those all together impact policy that then impact lives. So it's just being able to do that. And so I stay being disciplinarily disobedient and getting folks to see that Black studies gives us lenses to really unpack the world around us. So, yeah.
Thank you. So I'm going to go back real quick because I noticed that your bachelor's is in biochemistry. Wait, how did you go from biochemistry to Black studies?
Child, I told you. So I was at Xavier because I wanted to be a pediatrician. And so people always are like, how did you make that jump? So I like to bring it up when I teach. So I made the jump really because of Hurricane Katrina. So I was a senior at Xavier the year that Hurricane Katrina came through New Orleans and really turned the city upside down. And so there was an interesting change. So about in the summer of 2005, I was in Maryland for a summer internship at the University of Maryland. But I was working in a lab. So I'm working in a lab in College Park. My roommate from the year before is in Maryland working at the Reginald Lewis Museum because it's about to open. So she was like, oh, you should come up, the weekend that it opens. So I'm at College Park in a lab. And then I, hopped the train or however I got to Baltimore. And I went to the Reginald Lewis Museum. And even before that, I had a campus card. And I was buying all these books about like Black theory, Black psychology. Like I was just buying stuff because I was like, there's so many Black books everywhere I turn. Like I just need them. So somewhere between the summer of 2005, where I'm like in a chem lab, but I'm at this museum and I'm collecting all these Black books, to Hurricane Katrina when I leave the city, so I make it out of the city before the hurricane and come back to Charleston, and I enroll in 2 classes. So one is a writing class and one is a African American literature class. I love that African American literature class. Like I was like taking notes. I just wanted to read. And then I was part of the chemistry club too. I just kind of joined it to keep my science because I was like, I don't want to enroll in science classes at this moment. And so there was like a shift. I don't know what happened. I don't have a clue. I wish I could say that there was some like light bulb, but I just knew I was very interested at the time in like Black psychology because I had been witnessing so much change in people and in community especially after hurricanes, because I had
Mhm.
moved around so many climates. And so I was like, I don't think I want to do pharmaceuticals because that's what I thought all biochemists went on to do. Um, but I wanted to do something else. And so somewhere between a Black psychology, Black literature love, I made I applied to Ohio State and they accepted me. And I didn't really look back into Black psychology. I just moved into a lot of Black Atlantic world research under the direction of Walter Rucker and Leslie Alexander. And then later, Valerie Kinlock, that was my committee of scholars who really took the time out to say, let's think about where do Gullah Geechee folks fit in the Black Atlantic world? And then later, how do you teach about Gullah Geechee culture in a larger conversation? So, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
And I'm gonna come back to that too, because I wanna ask that question, as well. I had a thought, okay.
Got it.
Oh, yes. So, as someone who is, like, from South Carolina and
Mhm,
then did undergrad in Louisiana
mhm.
and then moved to the Midwest, what was that transition like? I'm always interested with people who are not from the Midwest, but then wind up in the Midwest for extended periods of time. Think about that,
Yeah,
because it is a different space.
it is. It was a different space, and it was a very, um I don't even know, it felt kinda like a portal, right? So it actually changed the trajectory of my own research, and not as in, like, it took it in a completely different realm, it actually expanded it. So, being in the Midwest, so for grad school, for whatever reason, it seemed like every Black Southern person I could find had found their way into either a nope, because that wouldn't even be right. I was gonna say into a humanities graduate program, but that's not true. So I had colleagues from Florida, I had friends from Louisiana, people from Mississippi, and I'm like, how we all get here? Right? Like, how did all these Southern Black folks, Black graduate students to be specific, end up in a place like end up in Columbus, Ohio together? Um, so that was one thing. I mean, the climate is I had to adjust to the snow. It also taught me that Columbus is a very global city. It has a large Somali population, as does a lot of Midwestern cities has
Mhm.
a lot of East African community members. And so I was like, oh, I learned something new. And then when I moved to Michigan, it was the same thing. It was more Southern Black folks, more Southern Black graduate students like in the Midwest. And I'm like, how do we all end up here? Once again, Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama, Tennessee. And I was just like, this is intriguing. And then one more South that we don't really talk enough about is the Caribbean.
Mhm.
So it was really in Michigan where I had an opportunity to really think about, like, how do people come to a place? Like, how do we get here? Um, what is our role? And so to be in conversation with so many Puerto Ricans, like especially Afro Puerto Rican women, in Michigan. Also, I had never really seen an American Indian and Indigenous Studies program before. And so Michigan is the first place that I see that. And I'm like, oh, like, I got, my brain is exploding. Like, talk to me about the theories over here. How are you talking about land? Something about hurricanes. Like, it, being in those places taught me also a lot more about migration.
Mhm.
Be the church I attended in Michigan, a lot of the folks there told me, they're like, "I moved from the South to be here to be a teacher in, like, the '60s or the '50s." You also just learn about, you learn a lot about people's cultures. I still don't understand, I'm still learning. But I was like, "There's a line dance love in Michigan, ballroom dancing." I was like, "You know what? I didn't pick any of that up." I still feel like I got 2 left feet, and I feel bad because the Tamia line dance have been out as long as I've been living in Michigan, and I never learned it, and it goes mainstream, and I'm like, "I'm ashamed." But there was something about living in the Midwest that is a reminder that people relocated here for a lot of reasons.
Mhm.
Um, and also that we are kin, right? Like that we are connected in these different kinds of ways, whether you move for education, which was my case, or you move for a job, which was some of the community members' case. And so I'm like, oh, there's a lot of things that I have left to learn. And also I learned how to map out Michigan on the correct hand. I learned all of that. And I learned that I get to be on the right side of history for both times because I went to Ohio State and Michigan State, and neither one of them liked the University of Michigan. So there's that.
Very true. Very true.
So, yeah.
Okay. That's I mean, yeah. Being from Michigan, like, one, yes, everybody migrated there from the South. My grandparents came from Mississippi to work in my grandpa worked for General Motors for 40 years. So,
Mm.
like, that's just and then half of Lansing is literally, like, related to my grandfather. They all moved up as a family together.
See?
Um, but I'm always interested how people come to Michigan because I know what my grandmother has told me about her experience moving from Mississippi to Michigan. How
I think there was something there about I think Ohio helped me.
Mhm,
Living in Ohio also reminded me that the Midwest plays such a big role in, like, Black culture and, especially music culture, so at some point, my mom came up and we went to Motown, and my mom had a blast because 'cause I'm like, "This is her music," right?
mhm.
Like, this is what she grew up on, and so, the tour guide was so engaging, and it was such a magical moment for me because I was like, "I don't know what I'm going to Michigan for. I have no idea. I'm just going for work." And then you really, like, settle into it. You settle into being in this community and being in a place, and you're just like, people live here. Like, this is not a it's not a one-stop situation. People do
Mhm.
live here, and you can make a life here. And I appreciated Michigan for that. Like, I learned so much living there. The only thing was, it was a little difficult being single in Lansing, but I made really great friends. I enjoyed the community there, and I also enjoyed having all 4 seasons. So, I don't know if the people who do the pure Michigan commercials listening, but we would like a little, if y'all looking to do some ads, we're here to help.
Yeah, Lansing was rough in a
Yeah,
couple areas, and that can be considered one of them for sure.
yeah, yeah.
So I wanna go back to what you said, one, about, how you came to think about and, like yeah, how you came to think about teaching about
Mm,
Gullah Geechee culture,
mhm.
um, and the land and all of that. Can you expand on that and how your experiences and the training that you received influences the way that you teach that, but also the other things that you engage in your classrooms?
Yeah. Being from here and then going away, I think it never really hit me that I was a Gullah Geechee person because it wasn't really an identity that people walked around Charleston saying, like, I'm black, and so I'm Geechee. Like, it just wasn't a thing. At one point, we had Geechee gear, like, back in the 90s. I'm so sad that did not make it, but I feel like somebody's gonna bring it back. So you found that there was a generational gap. So people my mom's age and older to identify as Gullah, as Geechee, like any of those words meant you was gonna get punched in the face. Like it was seen as derogatory. And so to have my generation come along and try to re-embrace it, it's like, how do you negotiate those? And then the very middle ground for when I was interested in teaching it was trying to avoid people who have commercialized it. So at the time, there's all these businesses that open and they're like, we're Gullah this and we're Geechee that. And I'm like, but are you Black? Like, because if you're not, then we need to have a real conversation about
Mhm.
why that label on this item or this business. Um, and and so to teach about that is to help people understand like why people were brought to the US, and then to unpack that we're more than just, when people talk about our culture, we're more than just sweetgrass baskets. That's usually where people go, but I was like, you have to understand where the sweetgrass basket comes from, and to understand that it is both African and indigenous. Like it's indigenous on one side of the Atlantic and it's indigenous on the other side, on this side of the Atlantic too, because sweetgrass doesn't come from, it didn't come from West Africa. So the fact that we decided to fuse it into the baskets here on the Atlantic coast, I'm like, that's a story of something, right? Like there's a story there, right? Black and indigenous relations. So that was the one part. The other part was like, let's talk about the technology of rice growing, especially around land, because you can still see changes in the landscape.
Mhm.
Um, you can still see the rice fields from aerial views, and we're talking, rice fields in from the 1700s, early 1800s. And so when I teach, I also want to teach people about the current environmental issues that we're facing. So if we are living in, we start the Gullah Geechee corridor, according to the National Heritage Act that established it, goes from North Carolina, around Wilmington, North Carolina, down to Jacksonville, Florida, a little bit lower, and then 30 miles in. So you're looking at communities that could be deeply impacted by flooding, by beach erosion, by urban sprawl. So everybody wants to have a waterfront property,
Mhm.
and so all of those things are deeply impacting Gullah Geechee communities. And so while people come because they want the food and they want the crafts, people are fighting real battles about preserving a land and keeping a hold to a land that people are coming to for tourism, but we don't get any of those tourism dollars, or the environmental impact is really starting to displace us. So how do we reconcile all of that? And so that's really my goal in teaching, is helping students understand how we got here, how we're trying to sustain ourselves here, and then what is their role. And we talk like policies, when we talk about rezoning and all of that, like just because you're a student, you can still go to meetings and hear
Mhm.
what are the issues that are important to these communities.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Are there, are there so the importance of the land and what that means for the people who are on it, and the shifting nature, both climate-wise and, like, zoning
Mhm.
issues and things like that, um, are there particular aspects of Black studies that you feel help to convey or facilitate those conversations in ways that might not otherwise be possible?
Yeah. I've in the work, I stumbled upon Black geographies, and that shifted the whole way I look at everything. So whether it's the fact that, Catherine McKittrick writes about plantations and prisons, Ruthie Wilson Gilmore writes about abolition geographies, like just all those two scholars, Clyde Woods, like they really shaped a lot of my thinking. Um, Christina Sharp, when she talks about being in the wake, they helped me think about the fact that Black geographies are mappable, that Black people do have a geography, that we're living in the wake. I think about Tiffany King, Black Shoals, and then what does it mean for, like, when you put those two together of wake and shoals, it's like, okay, well, as a community member who lives on Johns Island, is a barrier island. No, it's a sea island. And so there is a small barrier island that keeps us protected, allegedly from the water, but it's dealing with erosion. And so what does it mean when Black people live on these sea islands? So that's part of it, is how do we have these conversations, all the theories and talking about where water meets land, our relationships to one another through water. So I think about Yomida Figueroa's work, as well, Jessica Marie Johnson's work, like all of the scholars who are looking at how we can think about water and islands, have deeply shaped me. And then I've been trying to figure out where the intersections are between Black studies and American archipelagic studies and island studies. And so I feel like the Gullah Geechee communities are kind of like the gateway to pull the two together. Because American archipelagic studies is really interested in places like Guam or Hawaii, islands in the Pacific and a few in the Caribbean Sea and Atlantic Ocean. But it's like, what happens when you actually think about these things that are part of the U.S., but they're also islands,
Mhm.
and how we can learn from one another and how we respond to climate change, to natural disaster. Because I think some of the things we've seen, the part that intrigues me is recently was when Hurricane, I think Helene, went through Asheville. I think that was a hurricane, and it flooded, and people are like, "Wait a minute, flooding in the mountains?" And I'm like, "Well, let's go over here. Like, what did Puerto Rico do in response to Maria and Irma, right? What did the Sea Islands do? What did New Orleans do? What are we doing in response to these hurricanes, and what is our governments doing?" So I think Black Studies offers, for me, an idea, a lens, a frame for thinking about Black people's relationship to land, that we are mappable, that we have maps, but also the idea of some of our maps can be hidden,
Mhm.
and that some things just aren't for public knowledge and consumption.
Yeah.
It was a really big one for me. And so just really thinking about Black people's maps, placemaking, and connections to land and water is, I think, Black Studies gave me all the frames, and put them together. So yeah.
Okay, thank you. I
You're
really
welcome.
appreciate that elaboration and the reminder about like Black geographies and shoals and wakes. And that's so important to remember. And the fact that, like, every map don't need to be visible to everybody,
Nope.
particularly right now.
Nope.
Unnecessary.
Hide your map.
So you kind of touched on this, but I want to invite you to expand on two things. So one, um, I mean, you are the executive director of a research center. So first, I want to ask, is there any current research that you're working on that you want to talk more about?
Sure. So as a director of the research center, I would probably say, one thing that I appreciate about the place is that we actually facilitate research more than we take on our own.
Mhm.
Um, I've been enjoying, I'll say, so for the first part, I've been enjoying watching community members come into Avery, um, and finding things they weren't looking for and finding people they weren't looking for. A woman came in, I think she was looking for her aunt, but found her grandmother, in the like school records. I gave someone a tour and they found pictures of their grandmother in a yearbook. And they were like, I've never seen this picture of her this young, right? Or of other relatives. So that's, for me, that kind of stuff makes my day every day. When people when people come in for answers they didn't even know they were looking for. For my own research, I am working on, we're gonna put it in the universe. I'm working on a book that's really been um about 7+ years in the making. And it's about home. It's about Johns Island. It's about, speaking of all the things about mapping, it's about how Black women make maps on Johns Island, built on kinship, um, built on their networks and understandings. And then what do we do with those maps? And so that's really the crux of the project. I'm trying to think if there are more chapters, but I was just interested in talking about Johns Island because my mother said something once when we were in a car where she said, one day we're going to look up and Johns Island's not going to be on the map. And when she said it, I was just like, that's impossible. Like, it's not going anywhere. It's right there. But then, like, in hindsight, you're like, between climate change, between, people who like to move to communities and rename them.
Yeah.
I think I saw a reel, about like, no, this is not, like, nobody ever says they're going here. I think they're talking about New York. And they're like, nobody ever calls it whatever the phrase was. And so in Charleston, it's the same thing. It's like, nobody calls parts of the city this. Like, they don't call it NOMO or they don't call it
Yeah.
SEMO or whatever. It's like nobody calls it that. And so, but we do know that that's happening. And then the third part of it is the actual annexation of Johns Island into the city of Charleston. So Johns Island is an unincorporated part of Charleston County. And so I wanted to write this book to remind people that Johns Island did exist as a Black familial community. And it was, people understood it by who lived there. And I think we're getting away from that with all the development that's happening. So between development and climate change, my mom might have been right, So that's what I'm working on.
Well, that is going to be a wonderful contribution. And I think it fits, like, we're in a moment right now where so many Black women are writing about things that are connected to their families and their family histories. And one, I'm definitely here for it. But also, I think it's so important to commemorate these things in a particular moment in history where so many archives are being deleted or hidden or silenced, and things are being labeled as corrosive and divisive when it's just what happened. Having those stories out there is so necessary for not just this moment, but wherever moments come after this current time that we're in. So I'm very much looking forward to that.
Thank you. Yeah, you're right. It's got to write it down or it didn't happen,
Yeah. It's got to be recorded somewhere.
Exactly.
So my second question that I was going to ask that kind of built on some of the things you already said. So if you feel like you've covered this, that's fine. But what is most exciting to you about, like, the past of Black studies?
What's most exciting to me is, so the first part, I'm going to honk my horn. I'm going to toot my horn just a little bit. So when I told people I was going away to get a master's in African American studies, this was in 2007. People, like, I got a lot of raised eyebrows, because I, like you said, I left biochemistry and I made this move and folks are like, and you doing what? You going to Ohio to do African American whatever? Fast forward to 2020. Now everybody want a Black studies degree, like, no. And so there was something, like, I'm not saying that I'm completely ahead of my time, but I think that there is something that I am excited about is watching people come to Black studies for answers. I think it's the country believed, all of the anti-CRT people believed that was going to do something. I don't know what they thought it was going to do, but I was like, it's just like anything else. When you tell a child, do not touch the iron, it is hot. Okay, well, let me check. I don't know what hot is. Same thing, so people will be like, CRT, and they're like, well, CRT is not this, right? DEI is not this. It's not Black studies. So, of course, people are like, well, let me go open a book. Let me go sit in a class and really figure out then what is Black studies. And I think that's what excites me the most about watching people come to it. I think it also excites me to think about, what's not just the things of the, you know, of the past, but also just like when I think about moments. So for example, I'll give this example. When we talk about the past, Avery is more than just it's more than an archive. It's an archive, a library, and a museum. But
Mhm.
most importantly, it's a community hub. So any given day, a person can walk through that door, once we let them in, because it's locked. Can walk through that door and they could be you would just be like, "Oh, they're just a regular schmegular person." There have been days that I've had conversations with Dr. Millicent Brown. Dr. Millicent Brown is the woman whose case was responsible for desegregating Charleston County schools. And so the fact that she just comes by, she just comes by, she's just like, "Can I get a copy of this?" Or can let's have a conversation about that. And I'm like, "But you know, you're you know, you're," and so it excites me in the sense that it's a reminder that history and the work that we do and the social movements are not dead.
Mhm.
These people are not dead. Black studies is not dead. It is very much a living field. It is a framework. It offers us frameworks, I should say, that I'm like, you don't need a brand new blueprint for how to deal with injustice. You just need different groups of people to make your strategy happen. So the fact that she's here, still very active in the community, still fighting injustices, those things excite me so much. It excites me to say, well, how did these individuals think about, for example, Mr. James Eber Campbell? I knew Mr. Campbell faintly, like very small, uh, kind of interactions. But he's a big deal. He passed. He was 100 years old. He celebrated his 100th birthday this year. But this man worked alongside Malcolm X
Mhm.
in the creation of the Organization of Afro-American Unity, and his papers live at Avery. We got photographs of Mr. Campbell with James Baldwin. We got, you know, we got letters that Langston Hughes, wrote to Mr. Campbell. It's just, I was like, this, like, you just wouldn't know because he was such a quiet man, um, until you sat down with him and then he just had a lot to say. But I'm like, Black studies, there's a lot of folks around who are teaching us, and we just they could just walk past you. And so what excites me is that there are institutions committed to preserving these stories so that we can understand what are the roots of Black studies, what have been the questions that Black studies been trying to answer. And then also I feel like there's also a calling out that um a lot of our ancestors made of like, what are you going to do with this now?
Mhm.
Right? Like, what's going to be how you going to take this on now? Because your times might look a little different than ours. So what you going to do?
Yeah.
And I think, and that's what excites me, is just being like, there are people from history walking past me every day, or that I just get to access all the beautiful things they've collected and kept, um, for people like us to find one day.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, thanks.
And so such an again, important reminders. Like like so many people are still here. They're still walking amongst us, or they've left their papers places that we can go and access and read and study and learn the strategies that are necessary to figure out what we're going to do in this moment,
Mhm.
because they had to handle their own moments
Yeah.
and they had strategies that we can update and work with
Yeah.
now. So, okay, last question, and then I'm gonna
Okay. Awesome.
So, which you kind of touched on in your response to what excites you, But are there particular questions or particular places that you think Black studies should be going right now, especially given everything that it is facing and dealing with in this moment?
My hope is that Black studies will continue to attract curious students, curious learners, that it will partner with other fields and disciplines to keep finding new ways to uncover our stories in places that we didn't know where they might have been. Um, I'm so interested in global Black studies and thinking about, where are the Black Scottish people, the Black Scots? Where are the, Black Brits? Like, I've been learning so much and I'm just like, there are parallels here um, that we could learn from. And so I hope that we can get some of our, America, US based scholars to really listen in to what some of our global Black scholars are saying and calling them in, because we do know that Black studies is global.
Yeah.
It has its roots are global. And I think we've gotten so tangled up in our own local issues that sometimes we forget the global dynamic of the field. The other thing that I hope we will figure out is how are we going to interact with, how are we going to use, how are we going to shape the AI machine?
Mhm.
Because I hear so many folks get excited and scared about AI, but I'm like, but a lot of the times it's because we're not driving the machine, right?
Yeah.
Like we don't have no guardrails on it. We're not in the driver's seat. And so I'm just so curious to see how we're going to take on AI to come up with more problem solving when we also know that AI centers are responsible for so much environmental damage.
Yeah.
So we got to figure out how are we going to negotiate those um, for our own survival, um, and use those tools. It's just like fire, right? Like fire, when uncontrolled, will destroy a whole life. But when controlled, we can use it and build such great things, right? We see it in the work of like people who does blacksmithing, and they're
Mhm.
able to make wrought iron gates. That's just how I feel like AI is like if you can figure out how to hone it in and bring it in, I think we can use to create so much to from holographic maps that you could kind of or holographic buildings of places that just do not stand, to remind us like, hey, this space that you think is empty is filled with with so much memory.
Mhm.
To also, I think I've heard a couple folks talking about using it on one scale in terms of attracting people into museums to see Black art. I think I saw someone do that with Amy Sherrill's portraitures, where they like animated all of her art. So just thinking about there has to be ways that I think Black studies, and I think we're having those conversations, but I would like to see us do that more. And then the very last one is, how do you take all of those to connect us back to land and keep having our conversations about what are our responsibilities to one another in land, and then what are our relationships to one
Mhm.
another in land. And I think Black studies can is showing us how we can do that, and not necessarily like a return to the land, because I don't think we ever left, but just a reminder that you are connected to land, the one right under your feet
Yeah.
and ones farther, which was one of the things I wanted students to remember is your legacy and your work, your genealogy is a lot farther than the block you grew up on, right? Like you had to get there somehow. So let's trace those footprints and figure out, where else are you connected to and how you're responsible to those lands as well.
Thank you so much. I think that's a wonderful point to end on, but is there anything else you would like to add?
No, I would just ask people, I'm going to make a shameless plug and ask people to follow Avery Research Center, um, you know, on all social media platforms. And also, if there is a Black museum, a Black cultural institution in your state, and I'm not gonna say if, because I know that there is one in every state, that people plug in and figure out, what are they doing to preserve stories, to amplify stories, and how can you support them? Because I know whether it's a historic house, or a museum or an archive, at this particular junction, Black studies is everybody's job.
Mhm.
Like the building of the theory, the saving of the stories. Um, we're all responsible. So really tune in and tap into those folks and try to support them to the best of your abilities.
Thank you so much. I
Thank
really
you.
enjoyed talking with you and getting to catch up because I have not been able to talk with you for real in years. So
Mhm. Well, I love this. Thank you so much for having me.
thank you. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. You too.